Hello, Mr. Gandhi. Thank you for agreeing to meet me on such short notice. As you are well aware, the economic well-being of India is of great importance to the United Kingdom. You, Gandhi, as India's spiritual leader, have a large role to play in its success.
Thank you, Mr. Churchill, but the Indian people do not seek your help or the help of any other nation. We seek to become economically self-sufficient and to be free from an unfair trading system that threatens to place us under colonial oppression once more.
Mr. Gandhi, the thought of self-sufficiency may sound splendid on paper, but in practice it will only.
Enough. India has spent centuries colonized as a result of Britain's capitalistic intentions. We were exploited for our resources and goods while our children were forced to beg in the streets or starve. Never again. We will shun the cancerous growth of greed and avarice and return to our old ways, embracing our spiritual heritage and live as small self-sufficient villages in peace and harmony.
Mr. Gandhi, it is true that Britain was less than fair in our dealings with India, even criminal at times, but we have tried to make amends. Are you familiar with the name Adam Smith?
Certainly. You must remember, Mr. Churchill, that I am hardly an uneducated man.
Of course, old chap. I was merely asking for the sake of rhetoric. As you are well aware, Adam Smith was the father of the economic theory of capitalism. The colonization of India was in accordance with a different economic theory, that of mercantilism. But I digress. Are you aware of the economic principles of absolute and comparative advantage?
Completely. But since you seemed to be so well versed on the subject, I feel that an explanation is inevitable.
Well then, the principle of absolute advantage was first introduced in Adam Smith's 1776 book, On the Wealth of Nations. It refers to the ability of a nation or group of people to produce more of a good or service than another nation with the same amount of resources. For example, let's use two nations that are all too familiar to us both, America and Pakistan. With X number of workers, tons of steel and other parts, and time, the United States can produce, let's say, 10 cars, largely as a result of their technological advances and worker productivity. Your neighbors, the Pakistanis, however, can only produce 3 cars with the same amount of resources. Thus, the United States has an absolute advantage in the production of cars.
Of course.
Now then, the principle of comparative advantage was developed many years after Adam Smith's death by another Englishman named David Ricardo in the early 1800s. It was created to explain why certain nations would trade certain goods with each other even though one nation had an absolute advantage in most, if not all goods, traded between the two nations. I believe Ricardo's example involved wine and cloth traded between England and Portugal.
What is your point, Mr. Churchill?
My point, Mr. Gandhi, is that although Great Britain can produce many goods at an absolute advantage compared to India, we produce some goods better than others. We can produce 3,000 Rolls-Royces or 300 tons of tea. Your nation can produce 1,000 Rolls-Royces or 200 tons of tea. The opportunity cost of 100 tons of tea in Britain could be measured as 1,000 Rolls-Royces. But in India, the opportunity cost of 100 tons of tea is merely 500 fine automobiles. As a result, India should specialize in the production of tea and Britain in the production of luxury automobiles. That is the principle of comparative advantage. Nations should specialize based on their relative costs for the production of goods.
I disagree with aspects of your characterization, and I would hope the people of Britain could produce something more useful than luxury automobiles, but your point has been made.
Trade could benefit both of our nations economically, and given your lack of harmony with your Western neighbor, a stronger economy would serve you well.
I will convey your message to my advisors. Although we have priorities that supersede mere financial gain, it is an interesting vision to be sure. Perhaps leaders of a future generation will be seduced by it. Thank you for your time, Mr. Churchill.
Godspeed, Mr. Gandhi.